Canada's Armed Forces is facing some major challenges. A report released last week by the Department of Defence says the forces can't deploy multiple operations at the same time, in part because of ongoing recruitment issues, aging equipment, and planned spending cuts. The Minister of National Defence, Blair, spent the past number of days at the Halifax Security Forum with counterparts and allies from around the world. I caught up with him from there on Friday. Minister Blair, nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Of course. Good morning, Rosemary.
You said in your speech in Halifax on Friday that investments are needed in your department and, quote, we need resources to put behind our aspirations. What does that mean concretely, Minister Blair?
We have obligations. We have obligations to our NATO partners. We have obligations on the continent to the United States through NORAD. We've assumed new responsibilities in the Indo-Pacific, and we've told our allies that we'll be there, and I've got to make sure that we provide the Canadian Armed Forces with the resources, the capabilities, the platforms that they need, and the people that they need to live up to those aspirations. And so I was simply acknowledging to the room that we've got a lot of work to do, and we've got to, first of all, have the funding that we need in order to make those investments, but we've also got to improve our procurement processes to get the job done in a timely way, because the need, quite frankly, is rather urgent.
The first federal spending review, as you know, has been released about a week back, and the Department of National Defence, they account for about 42% of the total cuts made in that batch, so more than $210 million. How does that make sense with what you've just said, that you need to spend more, but you've already had to make a significant cut?
Yeah, no, can I be really clear, though? We need to spend more on the right things. We need to spend more on munitions. We need to spend more on military platforms, planes, submarines, and ships. We need to spend more on the equipment, the resources, and the training that the Canadian Armed Forces needs. And at the same time, we're spending public dollars. And so it is incumbent upon us to make sure that our processes are efficient. And so we're looking at money that we're spending on consultants, money spent on professional services, some of which are essential, but not all of which are, and even on such things as executive travel. And I think it's important in every bureaucracy, including in the Department of National Defence, to look carefully at how we're spending people's money, so that, because every dollar spent is an investment in public value, I just want to make sure we're getting the best value for those Canadian dollars being spent.
The Chief of the Defence Staff was talking to us on Remembrance Day last week, and he obviously acknowledged many of the things that you did in your speech, too, the multiple security threats around the world and sort of how we deal with them. But he also said this, that the study of our military history could almost be considered a study in under-preparedness. And that's not the first time he said something like that, as you know, Minister. How are you addressing those concerns? Because I hear you saying all the things that you said today and you've said before, but how are you addressing things for the Chief of the Defence Staff, who is very concerned about preparedness?
Well, frankly, it's a concern that I share with him. And we both have a job to do. We both have a responsibility to make sure that the Canadian Armed Forces is prepared to respond appropriately and to do what we are obliged to do under our NATO and NORAD commitments and in the defense of our own country. It's the Chief of Defense's job, and it's my job, to work together in order to make sure that we have the funding necessary, and a lot of that has already been provided in the strong, secure, and engaged defense policy that was released even in 2017. It did indicate a very strong increase in defense spending, almost 70%. Over an 8-year period, and we're well along on that. But the changing threat environment in the world, with the war in Ukraine, with Middle East conflict, with increasingly concerning activities by China and Russia and other hostile actors, it is obvious that we need to do more. And that there are some new threats that need to be met in cyber and in space, in underwater warfare. My job is to make sure that the Canadian Armed Forces have the tools that they need, and part of that is working with the Department of National Defence and the Chief of Defence and a number of my other partners in government to make sure that those procurement processes are effective and efficient, and we get the job done.
I'm not saying that I disagree. Obviously, you and the Chief of the Defence Staff work closely together, but you also have to answer to other things. And one of those things are fiscal restraints and how the Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister has to guide the rest of the government's budget within those constraints. I think that's why we saw that initial cut. To your point, I see that you were trying to not make it about some of the key areas. But are you expecting to see more of that in the fall economic update? Have you been given other indications that more of the budget is on the table? What have you said at the cabinet table to say, I have to keep this because I'm in big trouble here?
Well, and Rosemary, to be very clear, I'm a member of this government. We understand, the fiscal situation that the country faces, and it's not just the government; it's Canadians right across the country. And at the same time, I see investments in defence as just that, an investment in public value. And we may not be able to go as fast as we might have hoped, but we have to continue to move forward. And a big part of that for me as well is I've got to be able to provide to Canadian industry the certainty and the clarity of the direction that the Canadian government and the Canadian Armed Forces is going in, because I need them to start making investments in new supply chains and new production lines so that we can source the equipment that the Canadian Armed Forces needs right here in Canada. It creates Canadian jobs, it creates prosperity, and so it really is, I think there are real benefits to be realized by making investments, but the job is to make sure that we do it smart and that we do it carefully. We're spending limited public dollars, and my job, working with my colleagues in cabinet, is to make sure that every one of those dollars we spend, we actually produce something of value for Canadians. The
department, as you know, has tabled its results report for the year, and one of the things it said in very small print at the bottom of the page was that the armed forces were currently unable to conduct multiple operations concurrently, as the defense policy of 2017 is laid out. So I guess my first question is are the Canadian Armed Forces failing to meet the goals of that 2017 defense policy? And will the new policy better reflect what we're actually capable of doing?
Yeah. And Rosemary, let me be very, very clear. We are really challenged in meeting some of those defense requirements in this country. One of the challenges is the regular forces are short 9,000 people. Our reserves are also significantly short of personnel as well. A lot of our current platforms, the Halifax class frigates that our Navy sails, some of the planes that we have in the sky are aging out of service, and so we've got to make an investment in replacing those things. And I think for me, the most important thing is the men and women who serve. We've got to be able to do a better job of recruiting and retaining those people, training them to perform those missions. We ask a lot of the Canadian Armed Forces. We've made significant commitments to NATO and to NORAD, and we call upon the Canadian Armed Forces frequently. I know that they are challenged. I have a responsibility to make sure that they have the resources and the people that they need to do the jobs that we ask them to do.
Okay, but just to end on this, because I think it's important, if the defense policy is not meeting the goals it laid out in 2017, when will the new policy come, and will it lay out clearer goals that are actually able to be met?
Yes, ma'am. And let me be clear. In the budget 2022, we said that we're going to bring forward a new defense policy update. We've been working through that. The current fiscal environment that the country faces itself does require that defense policy update, recognize the fiscal challenges, and so it'll be part of our future budget processes. I understand there's an urgency to it. I've spoken to industry; they need that clarity. So does the Canadian Armed Forces, and Canadians expect that from us. And we're working very hard to do it. We want to do it right. And we want to do it in a way which is responsible to the challenges that all Canadians are facing with issues around affordability. And at the same time, we want to make sure that the Canadian Armed Forces get the people, the tools, the equipment, the platforms that they need. And we've got an obligation as well internationally to our allies. And Canada has to do its part, and we're absolutely committed to doing that.
Minister Blair, we'll leave it there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Rosemary.